So the CRUD stuff was like the work, right? That was the one I was like, well, I don't know what's going on here. Okay. So if we hop over to the CRUD one, we'll do CRUD here. Okay, so we'll go through this line by line. So the first one says get user by ID, and it says get user by object ID. Yeah, that's basically what it needs, an object ID. Not like an object with an ID property, but object ID, as in a Mongo object ID. So, and you're already given an ID here. So given this ID that it's asking for, you should return a user by that ID. So what we want to do is we want to return user.find by ID, pass the ID. And that should satisfy it because, again, we're given an ID. We're just going to use find by ID. This always returns a promise. So pretty much every query you do on the model is going to return a promise, almost every single one of them. So this should satisfy it. And if we can go look, you can see get user by object ID is good. So quick pro tip, yes, these queries do return a promise, but technically they're not really promises. What Mongoose is doing is they're actually returning a query object. And that's really advanced. We're probably not going to get to like query objects today because it's like an advanced thing. But you can think of it as like SQL-like querying on a query. And on that query object, there's a .then property. So anything consuming this query thinks it's a promise because there's a .then property on it. But in reality, it's not a real promise. So to avoid that, what you normally do is you use .exec at the end of a query like this to say, I'm done. There's no more querying coming after this. There's no more, because on a query, I can do things like .limit, .sort, .greater than, .less than. But when I'm done with all that, I can say, cool, I'm done, execute the query. So .exec is short for execute. So this is saying I'm done. There's no more querying coming after this. So just return a real promise, and that's what this does. So this will help you avoid any bugs that you might have that might be consuming this function and expecting a real promise. This will help avoid that. So always use .exec at the end of your queries. This won't work at the end of things like create, because a creation is not a query. So only for queries. Get all users. We'll just say return user.find wildcard exec. There's no arguments here, so it's just a wildcard. It's all the users. All right, and if we go check the test, that one passes. Get all users. For a create user, we're just going to return user.create. It's in the name, create. And we'll just pass the user details. So whatever details that the test decides to pass us, it's up to the test to make sure those details are correct. We're just going to save it. And we can check to see if that worked. And that worked, so create a user succeeded. We have, the next one we have is remove user by ID. So given an ID, remove a user. So if we say return user.find by ID and remove, I know it's so verbose, .exec, because that's a query. We know it's a query because it has find in it. That should pass, and now we get remove user by ID. That's successful. There's another way you can do this. You could just user.find by ID, grab the user, and I didn't teach you how to do this, but you could use the .remove method on the document instance itself. Remember I told you the documents that you get back from Mongoose aren't JavaScript documents, they're like Mongoose documents. Well, they have properties on them and methods. One of them is a .remove. You can do .remove on the document itself, the instance, and it will remove itself. So you can do it that way. But obviously this way is just way cleaner, and it's just in one operation. And then the last one is update user by ID. So we have an ID, and then we have some properties to update. So I'm just going to say return user.find by ID and update. So ID is the one that's passed in here. And then the update is the update. Now, if you ran this, you probably expected it to work. And now it's just hanging. So yeah, if you ran this, you probably expect this to work, right? But if you got to this point, you might have realized that this one might not work all the way because there's something else you have to do. So I'm gonna let this run. And you can see right here, my test is failing. So it's expecting beta user to be true, but instead it's getting false. And that's not because it's not updating in a database. It is updating in a database. The problem is find by ID and update isn't returning the newly updated user. By default, it's just not going to do that. Even though it updated in a database, what it's returning is the user before it got updated. So how helpful is that? It's not that helpful. So what you have to do is you have to add this third option here to find by ID and update, and you have to put new true. And that means return the new thing that got updated, the new instance. It doesn't mean create a new one. That option is called upsert, as in if this doesn't exist, create a new one. That's what that does. New means return the updated object. After the update operation is done, return that object. And that's the one that we want. That's what the test is expecting. So I saved that one for last to let you explore a little bit.
Does that need an exec at the end?
And it does need an exec because it has a find on it. That's exactly right. Cool.
If you do separately the update or remove, like dot remove, then it's not exec anymore, right?
Right. The exec is only for model queries.
I mean, yeah, if you do it find, update at the end, that's it.
Yeah, then you're fine, yeah. So now if you run the tests, all those tests should pass. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hop into more advanced things in Mongo, things like more advanced queries, so using some type of filtering type of options. We're going to talk about relations. How does that work with Mongo? And like, yeah, many to one to many, those different types of things. So that's what we're going to do next. So I'm just going to go hop back into my test.js file, and I'm just going to continue to do my work in here.